This lecture is about acquisition and extinction. These are procedures used in classical conditioning, but they are also used in instrumental conditioning. We're going to talk about the procedures, and then we're going to talk about what Pavlov thought was happening during those procedures. So in classical conditioning, we pair the CS and the US together in temporal contiguity. The CS is presented, then it's followed by the US. A bell rings and the food follows. We do this time after time, and we call these trials. So along the x-axis are trials. This is just an example. We're going to do 13 trials of pairing the CS and the US. And along the y-axis is our measurement, our behavior, our condition response. So when we pair the CS and the US on one trial, we're going to get very little condition response. They haven't been associated much, so we're not going to get a response. But if we do it again, we might start seeing an increase in condition response. Do it again and again and again. Oftentimes, there is time between each trial. We call that the inter-trial interval, and we'll talk about that more in another lecture. But you can see, trial after trial, the condition response increases. We call this process of pairing the CS and the US acquisition. The animal is acquiring this association. And we call this an acquisition curve. Acquisition curve. Now, eventually, we're going to keep pairing the CS and the US, but we're not going to see much of an increase. Well, let's take salivation, for example. The animal can only salivate so much. We're going to reach a high or top level of performance that stabilizes out. We call that level an asymptote, or an asymptotic level of performance. Asymptote means we're not seeing any increase in behavior, even though we increase the number of times the CS and the US are paired together. Now, the animal might still be forming stronger and stronger associations, but we don't see that because the performance has peaked out. The animal can't perform anymore. Any more salivation, any more whatever behavior we're looking at. This is an example of the learning performance distinction. Learning may continue, but we don't see much in the way of increased performance because we've reached an asymptotic level. Okay, so what I just demonstrated, what is known as excitatory conditioning or excitatory appetitive conditioning. We're going to use the word appetitive quite a bit. Now, it comes from the word appetite because it's often associated with food. But in this context, we're going to use the word appetitive to just mean good, just means something the animal likes. So this is excitatory. We're creating excitatory associations with something the animal likes, food. Now, we might have excitatory aversive conditioning. We might pair a light with shock, aversive, not good, appetitive, good, aversive, not good. But I just gave you the example of an excitatory appetitive conditioning. Now, excitatory goes to the idea that connections are formed using excitatory neurotransmitters, excitatory associations. This is why we had to talk about this before. Now, during Pavlov's time, he really didn't understand the nature of specific neurotransmitters, but he knew that neurons can cause other neurons to be activated, excitatory, or neurons can cause other neurons to decrease in their action potentials, in their firing. That's inhibitory. Excitatory, inhibitory. Now, in research on Pavlovian conditioning, classical conditioning, it's often used in shorthand. We just say CS plus. CS is a conditioned stimulus, and plus means there's been an added US. It's just, again, shorthand. We could always write it as CSUS. Some people do. Some people say CSUS, and you know that they have connected a conditioned stimulus, like a bell, and a US, like food. But oftentimes they just use the CS plus. Still, another shorthand that you see oftentimes in journal articles is just a letter. A letter representing a specific stimulus. You might have the letter A plus. You just know that a stimulus, A, was then paired with a US. Sometimes the letter is representative somewhat. Like you might have a bell associated with food. Somebody might say B plus, bell plus. It depends on who you're reading, but we're going to be using these shorthands a lot in this class, so we got to get comfortable with them. Plus just means the US is presented after the CS, after the conditioned stimulus, or after stimulus A, which is also a conditioned stimulus. So what is happening in the brain? Well, if you read Pavlov's book, Conditioned Reflexes, he talked about centers of the brain, centers, very vague. We know a lot more about the biology of how things are connected in the brain. There's been a lot of work on this. But during Pavlov's time, he just kind of gave these vague ideas of centers. So he said that there is a reflex between a unconditioned stimulus and an unconditioned response, innate, born with. So this is a very bad drawing, but let's say down here is a representative of the dog's tongue. Sorry, it's the best I could do. You put a little lemon juice, or you put some food on the tongue, that automatically sends a signal to the US center, some part of the brain that is representing in some way food, and that connects between an unconditioned stimulus and an unconditioned response center of the brain, response center of the brain, and that goes down and causes the release of salivation from the salivary glands in the cheek. Okay, that's a reflex. It's automatic, it's innate, there's no learning. But let's say we presented a stimulus. I'm just throwing this out there, like a green light comes on. And the green light is presented, and then food follows. They are active at the same time in the brain. And this is the key. The key that Darwin said, when two areas of the brain are active together, they connect. When two areas of the brain are active together, they connect. So the CS center is active. Why? The green light's on. The US center of the brain is active. Why? It's got food in his mouth. And connections are formed. The more time the CS and the US are paired together, are active at the same time in the brain, the stronger the association. This is kind of a odd way of putting this, but this is kind of what's going on. We're forming connections. We're forming neural connections or associations. The more times the CS and the US are presented, the more trials, the stronger the connection. Now, when the green light is presented, it sends excitatory signals over to the US center, the food center, and that then connects and sends signals to the UR. The CS excites the US, and when the US center, the part that represents the food, is active, it's automatically connected to the response center. More times, the stronger the association. And eventually, the CS is producing the conditioned response. We can get connections, according to Pavlov, between the CS center and the US center, between whatever's happening in the brain when it sees a green light and whatever's happening in the brain when it is experiencing food. These connections create the conditioned response, but eventually we might just get connections between the CS center and the response center. We don't even have to go through the US center, the representation of food. This is known as an SS association, conditioned stimulus to unconditioned stimulus, SS, stimulus connection. But it's just, might as well get the SR connection, conditioned stimulus to the response center. Why? Because when the green light is on, the response center is also activated because the animal during training is getting food. Okay, so this is that associations going on. CS to response center. They associate. Why? Because they're active in the brain at the same time. What's that called? Temporal contiguity. Now, what happens if we present a CS, a conditioned stimulus that produces a conditioned response? It has already gone through acquisition. It produces a conditioned response. Green light comes on, the animal salivates. Or maybe you use the bell. The bell food, bell food, bell food. Now the bell makes the animal salivate. What happens then if we present the CS and do not present the US? Well, we're going to get salivation in the dog example. But what if we do that over and over again? CS comes on, nothing follows. CS comes on, nothing follows. This is a procedure called extinction. Extinction. After a conditioned response is established by pairing the CS and US, the CS is presented without reinforcement, without a US. Now, the symbol for that is CS minus. Plus means that the US is presented. CS plus means the conditioned stimulus, the bell, and the US are presented together. The plus represents the food. Bell, food, bell, food. Now, if the CS is presented without the US, we call that CS minus. Sometimes it's just A minus or some stimulus. B minus, X minus, Y minus. These are just shorthand ways of writing this. So if you see a minus, you know that a stimulus is presented, a conditioned stimulus is presented without the US. Takes a little practice, right? What do we find happens? What do we find happens is the conditioned response starts to decline. That kind of makes sense. The bell and food are presented together over and over. The bell is presented, the animal salivates. Now, what if you just ring the bell at the animal for the next 3 days? Eventually, it's going to be like, yeah, not going to salivate. What is happening in extinction? Theoretically, we're talking about theory of what's happening in the brain, what's happening with associations. What is happening in extinction? Well, one possibility is the animal's just forgetting. Whatever associations were there between the CS and the US, between the bell and food, is lost. Forgetting. The associations are no longer there. They wither away and die. We have no connections. That is a possibility. And in future lectures, we'll talk about some theories that say, yes, that's exactly what happens. But that's not Pavlov's theory. And this is key. Pavlov said no. He said a CS and a US, excitatory associations remain there. They stay there during extinction. But the animal learns something new. Excitatory associations remain, but the animal learns something new. New associations are made. And those associations are inhibitory associations. Excitatory associations might be using glutamate or norepinephrine. But now we make new associations. But these associations are inhibitory, maybe using GABA. So during extinction, excitatory associations are not lost. New and competing inhibitory associations are created, which compete. So basically, performance, behavior, performance, salivation, whatever, it's just a mathematical formula. It's just how much excitation was there created during acquisition minus the strength of inhibition, which was created during extinction. So in this class, we're going to talk about two algebraic formulas. The first one is this one, P equals E minus I. This is the simplest one. Performance is equal to excitation minus inhibition. The next one is going to be more difficult, but this is easy. So here we are in acquisition. We've reached an asymptotic level right here. And then we present the CS without reinforcement. A plus, A minus. A plus, A minus, just procedurally. And we see the performance go down. In other words, the CS is presented and nothing follows. The green light comes on and nothing follows. And of course, performance begins to decline. Eventually, we get nothing from the animal. Green light comes on, nothing happens. Here we are at the end of acquisition. There are strong associations between the CS and the US and the CS and the UR. These are excitatory associations. We're at the asymptotic level of acquisition. We have not done extinction yet, but now, procedurally, we present the green light, nothing follows. We didn't lose these excitatory associations. We didn't forget, according to Pavlov. We created inhibitory. This signal right here, this red one, is sending a signal over to the US saying, don't fire so much. To the US center, don't be as active. Inhibit, slow down. Don't fire as much. Don't activate as much. Again, another trial of extinction. And now it's even more powerful. The value of I, the strength of inhibition increases. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. Well, now we have two associations happening. When the green light comes on, it's sending a signal to the US saying activate, or sending a signal to the US saying activate, salivate, salivate. But we have another association, another connection. These connections are inhibitory. This red association is the CS is telling US stop, don't activate, don't activate. Telling the UR don't activate, and salivation goes down. Inhibition and excitation. Performance, what the animal does, performance is a function of excitation, how much strength we have here, minus the strength of inhibition. What creates inhibition? Inhibition is created in extinction. We're going to talk more about inhibition in other lectures. I'm just going to tell you now, and we're going to repeat it over and over, but inhibition is created when the CS, when the animal expects something, when the CS predicts something and it doesn't happen. The green light came on. The animal's looking for food. Where's food? I didn't get any food. I'm going to learn something new now. I'm going to learn that the green light, in fact, does not signal food when I expected it. That's inhibition. We have a whole lecture on inhibition. Okay, the reason that Pavlov had this theory that excitation is not lost during extinction, but new competing inhibitory associations are created, come from evidence in his lab, research in his lab, that supported this. There are several, but let's look at 3 procedures and results that support Pavlov's theory of extinction. His theory of extinction is inhibitory associations compete with excitatory associations. So the first one he called disinhibition. Disinhibition is a procedure where during the middle of extinction, some novel stimulus is presented, some loud noise, some distraction. He even had a case where the animal just had to pee. And that distraction caused a sudden increase in the conditioned response. So here we are in extinction and a distraction, and we get an increase in a conditioned response. So we're right in the middle of extinction. Everything's going fine. We have a decrease in conditioned response. Everything's fine. Well, what the heck was that? And we get this increase, this distraction. Now, if in fact excitatory associations are lost, why would a distraction suddenly make a conditioned response go back up? If it's lost, it's lost. And unless you're going to pair the CS and the US again together, we shouldn't see an increase. Why did we get this distraction causing this increase? It goes down again. But that distraction, let's look at that again. Here we are in extinction. Whoa, what's that? A distraction. And we get this increase. That's called disinhibition. To destroy inhibition. Pavlov's idea was excitatory associations aren't lost. They're there. Inhibition is created, but inhibition is more easily weakened by a distraction, goes away, or is ineffective by a distraction. And if that distraction affects inhibition but not excitation, the excitation comes back again. The performance comes back again. We see it. So disinhibition is a procedure where we have a distraction in the middle of extinction, and that distraction causes a sudden increase in the conditioned response, making Pavlov say, well, that excitation wasn't lost, wasn't forgotten, it's still there. All we had to do is get rid of the inhibition for a second, distract it away, and the conditioned response comes back. Okay, so that's one piece of evidence, disinhibition. The other example, there's going to be three. The second is spontaneous recovery. So this is a procedure, and it supports Pavlov's theory of extinction. After extinction, the animal is given a break. Some time goes by. We're at the end of extinction. I show the green light. The animal doesn't salivate at all. Dog, right? And I just go away. And then I come back half an hour later, an hour later, a day later, and I just present the CS again. I don't pair it. I don't present it with food. I don't present the CS with food. I just come back and show the green light. That's all I do. What do I find? A couple hours ago, the animal responded nothing at all to the green light. A couple hours go by, I show the green light, salivating again. Spontaneously coming back, spontaneous recovery. So here we are in acquisition is done, extinction, the CS is presented, nothing. And look at that, we got hardly any conditioned response. It's all the way down. And then I give the animal a break. Some time goes by, an hour, 2 hours, a day, whatever. And then I come back and I present the CS alone, and there's the response again. So you need to know the procedure of spontaneous recovery. It's extinction, followed by time, followed by presenting the CS alone, by itself, and then it'll go down. Now, if I gave the animal another break and came back, I would still see a spontaneous recovery. I probably just wouldn't see it as high. Each break coming back would produce a lower and lower spontaneous recovery. The last time the animal got food, when the green light or the stimulus was presented, was way back here in acquisition. This is just coming back. Now, if the animal forgot, if excitation is lost, that's not Pavlov's theory, then who cares if time goes by? It's lost, it's lost. But what Pavlov said was inhibition is created during extinction, and that inhibition competes with excitation. P equals E minus I. Performance is a function of excitation and minus inhibition. What he says is that inhibition is not only easily disrupted by a distraction, disinhibition, but it weakens more easily than excitation over time. In other words, the inhibition goes away a little bit here, and the excitation shines back through in spontaneous recovery. So let's give an example of how spontaneous recovery applies to kind of real world situations. Let's take a specific phobia, a treatment for a phobia. Let's say somebody has a phobia of spiders. And it's terrible, right? They have a terrible fear of spiders. And this can be really debilitating. So we bring them into the office, and we're a therapist, and we show them a symbol that doesn't really look like a spider, and we monitor, does that make you uncomfortable? Are you scared of that? No, I'm fine. What about this? Whoa, oh, what? Okay, I'm getting a little anxious looking at that. I mean, I know it doesn't really look like a spider, but it's kind of like a spider, and I don't know, right? We let them calm down. We're looking at a stimulus, and we're allowing that fear to extinguish. This is called systematic desensitization. Then we get something a little closer. And we monitor their behavior, and we look to see how scared they are, and we let that extinguish in the safety of an office, in a very calm environment. Maybe we teach them breathing techniques or mindfulness techniques or meditation techniques. And then we might show them this. Oh, wow. Oh, my heart is just racing. I'm just, okay, calm, relax. We're going to look at this stimulus, this CS, and we're going to allow it to decrease its conditioned response, which is fear. How was that created? These are created in childhood, right? Somebody sees a spider and somebody gets around them, like their parents, they can start freaking out, ah, spider, screaming, and the kid gets all scared. That's just association. I see a spider, I feel terrible fear, I make that connection. Those are very strong at an unconscious level. Systematic desensitization. We might then have a moving spider on a screen. Okay, the heart rate elevates and I get a little scared. We're going to allow you to see this. We're going to allow you to be in a calm environment. We're going to allow that conditioned response of fear to decrease. Okay, we might even bring in a spider in a little box, a live spider. Go through extinction. Each time we see a little bit of elevated heart rate, and we're going to decrease, we're going to calm down. People can do this. It might take weeks, might take many sessions. They might even have a spider crawl across their hand, happy as a clam, right? We're going through extinction. These are known as exposure therapies, behavioral exposure therapies. Systematic desensitization. We use these in treating a lot of types of anxiety disorders. Post-traumatic stress disorder uses forms of extinction to reduce the response to fearful memories. But what do you think happens? Here we are at the end of the session, and the client is saying, I'm cured. I have a spider on my hand. You are the most wonderful therapist. This is fantastic. The therapist has to know something. They have to know that if the person sees a spider in a week, they're in their house and a spider crawls on the wall, what's that person going to do? They can stick out their hand and go, hey, crawl on my hand. I love spiders. No, we're going to get a spontaneous recovery of fear. So you're going to have follow-ups to go through extinction again and again and again. Spontaneous recovery. The person thinks they're cured. Why am I suddenly terrified there's a spider on the wall? I thought I was cured 2 weeks ago. Spontaneous recovery. Okay, so here's the idea that not only does inhibition weaken or is more disrupted by a distraction, disinhibition, but it weakens over time more than excitatory associations, right? And so now, with a weakened inhibition, excitation shines on through. Performance, behavior, conditioned response performance is a function of excitation, which will remain rather strong, and inhibition, which now isn't as strong as it was at the end of extinction. And so performance increases, behavior increases. Okay, so now we get to the third one. We have disinhibition. This is support of Pavlov's theory of extinction. Disinhibition, a distraction during extinction, causes a sudden increase in conditioned response. Spontaneous recovery, after extinction, the animal's not showing any response, wait some time, come back, present the CS by itself, and the behavior comes back. Not quite as high as it used to be, but it comes back spontaneously. And finally, we have a procedure called rapid reacquisition. After extinction, the CS is paired with the US. That's the difference between spontaneous recovery and rapid reacquisition. Spontaneous recovery, I don't present the US. I don't give the animal food. I just present the CS again. In rapid reacquisition, I present the CS and the US again in temporal contiguity. I pair the two. And what I find is that the animal makes that association or shows the conditioned response really quickly. Let me give you an example. So if we present the CS and US again, does it go through the same basic idea of acquisition, the same as before? Is it the same thing? If excitation was really lost, if associations were really lost, it would just go through this normal conditioning process again. If it's lost, it has to start all over again. But we don't see that. We see, if we present the CS and the US again, we see this really rapid reacquisition. Gets up to an asymptotic level really quickly. This supports Pavlov's idea that the associations are still there. The excitatory associations are still there in the animal. All you got to do is connect the CS and US again. Boom. That performance is gonna come back very quickly. Rapid reacquisition not only is interesting theoretically, it supports Pavlov's ideas, all those things, but it's really important in therapy, especially exposure therapies, because somebody might have a fear or anxiety because of something, and you might work really hard as a therapist to get those responses down, which is really helpful. But that fear or that anxiety can come back, if they have a bad experience, can come back very rapidly. If that person sees a spider again and shows a fear response again, that phobia can come back. 2 weeks ago, that spider was walking on their hands, and now 3 weeks later, they see it, they show fear, spontaneous recovery, but now we have the fear response and the CS is the spider and the fear response comes back. Rapid reacquisition. This is also important in some aspects of drug addiction. That's a different lecture. Okay, so we've talked about acquisition. We've talked about Pavlov's theory of association in acquisition, excitatory. We've talked about the procedure of extinction and Pavlov's theory of extinction, which is inhibitory connections are formed and compete with excitatory associations that were created in acquisition. And support for his theory come from disinhibition, spontaneous recovery, and rapid reacquisition. You need to know the procedures and the results of those three things and how they inform us about Pavlov's theory.